There's a reason some women are desired temporarily, while others completely change the way men behave around them. A man who normally avoids commitment suddenly becomes intentional. He starts communicating differently, showing up differently, thinking long-term instead of short-term. And most people assume this happens because of beauty, seduction, or emotional games. But according to evolutionary psychologist David M. Buss in The Evolution of Desire, the deeper reason is far more psychological than most people realize. Men are not only attracted to beauty, they are deeply influenced by perceived value. And high-value women create something that instantly changes relationship dynamics, emotional rarity. Not because they pretend to be unattainable, but because their presence feels difficult to replace. That is what makes people take someone seriously. 1. Investment drive. Why men naturally start investing in certain women. According to David M. Buss in The Evolution of Desire, one of the strongest psychological triggers behind male commitment is investment. Men naturally begin investing more time, emotional energy, attention, and resources when they recognize a woman as genuinely high value. This investment is usually not forced or calculated. It happens subconsciously because the human mind instinctively protects and prioritizes things that feel rare and meaningful. This is why some women completely change the way men behave around them. A man who is normally inconsistent suddenly becomes more intentional. He starts making time for her, paying attention to details, and thinking more seriously about the future. Not because he was pressured into commitment, but because emotionally, he no longer sees the connection as casual. He begins feeling that this is someone worth keeping in his life. What many people misunderstand is that high value is not only about beauty or status. In many cases, it is emotional stability, self-respect, confidence, intelligence, warmth, and authenticity that create the strongest impact. When a woman carries herself with emotional maturity and does not desperately seek validation, people naturally perceive her differently. Her presence feels harder to replace, and that perception alone changes relationship dynamics. From an evolutionary perspective, men are more likely to invest in women they believe would improve the quality of their emotional and personal lives long term. Deep down, the mind begins asking unconscious questions. Do I feel at peace around her? Does she bring stability into my life? Would losing her create regret? The stronger those feelings become, the stronger the investment becomes as well. This is also why emotional investment often creates attachment. The more effort someone gives, the more emotionally connected they become to the relationship itself. Time, attention, protection, consistency, and emotional energy all increase the psychological value of the connection. In other words, people often become attached not only because of attraction, but because of how much of themselves they have invested. And this is where many women misunderstand commitment. They believe they must chase, overgive, or constantly prove their worth in order to be chosen. But genuine investment rarely grows from pressure. It grows when someone feels truly valuable. High-value women do not force men to invest. Their energy, standards, and emotional presence naturally inspire it. Because when someone feels rare, emotionally grounded, and difficult to replace, people instinctively become more serious about keeping them. 2. Mate guarding. The fear of losing a high-value woman. Another powerful mechanism explained by David M. Buss in The Evolution of Desire is something known as mate guarding. At its core, mate guarding is driven by one simple psychological instinct: the fear of losing someone valuable. When a man truly perceives a woman as rare, emotionally significant, and difficult to replace, his mindset often begins to change automatically. He becomes more attentive, more intentional, and far more aware of the possibility that someone else could recognize her value too. This is where many people misunderstand male commitment. They assume men become serious only because they suddenly feel ready. But in reality, emotional urgency often appears when a man realizes he could lose access to someone he deeply values. The possibility of loss creates pressure inside the human mind. And psychologically, people tend to fight harder for things they believe are slipping away or difficult to replace. That fear does not always appear in dramatic ways. Sometimes it shows up quietly. A man begins communicating more consistently. He becomes more protective of the relationship. He starts making clearer plans for the future. He may even begin improving himself without consciously realizing why. Because once someone emotionally matters, the instinct to maintain that connection becomes stronger. From an evolutionary perspective, men are naturally wired to secure relationships that feel meaningful and valuable. When a high-value woman enters a man's life, she often changes the way he views his other options. Temporary attention from multiple people starts feeling less satisfying compared to the emotional depth and stability he experiences with one woman who genuinely stands out. And this is important because real commitment usually begins when quantity loses its appeal and emotional quality becomes more valuable. This is why many men unconsciously begin reducing distractions when they become emotionally attached to a woman they respect. Not because someone forced them to, but because the relationship itself starts carrying greater psychological importance. Their priorities shift. The emotional reward of protecting a meaningful connection becomes stronger than the excitement of endless alternatives. And interestingly, high-value women often trigger this instinct without trying to compete for attention. They are not constantly chasing reassurance or trying to control someone's behavior. In fact, their emotional independence is often what creates the strongest impact. A woman who knows her worth, maintains her standards, and does not tolerate inconsistency creates a silent understanding. Losing her is possible. That possibility changes behavior because people rarely protect what they believe will always stay, no matter how little effort they give. But when someone feels valuable and capable of walking away, emotional investment naturally increases. Effort increases. Intentionality increases. Men begin thinking more carefully about their actions because the relationship no longer feels guaranteed. This is also why self-respect is deeply connected to attraction. A woman who values herself communicates, even without words, that access to her life must be earned through consistency, respect, and emotional maturity. And psychologically, that creates weight. The relationship begins feeling more meaningful because there is something real at stake. Many people believe commitment is created through pressure, jealousy games, or emotional manipulation. But genuine mate guarding usually comes from admiration and fear of loss, not control. A man becomes serious when he realizes the woman in front of him is not easily replaceable, and that losing her would create a real emotional absence in his life. According to David M. Buss, this instinct is deeply rooted in human psychology. People naturally protect what they value, and when a woman carries herself with emotional depth, confidence, peace, and self-respect, she often inspires a level of seriousness that cannot be forced through words alone. Because at the end of the day, the strongest motivation for commitment is not pressure. It is the realization that losing someone truly valuable would be a mistake difficult to recover from. Three, commitment trigger. When attraction turns into long-term attachment. At some point, something shifts inside a man when he meets a woman who feels different from everyone else he has encountered before. Not different in the loud or dramatic sense, but in a way that feels emotionally grounding. The constant urge to keep searching slowly loses its intensity, and without fully realizing it, his attention begins settling in one place. What once felt exciting about endless options suddenly starts feeling empty compared to the emotional depth of one meaningful connection. This is the commitment trigger, the moment where attraction stops being driven only by novelty, validation, or temporary excitement and starts becoming connected to emotional safety, admiration, and long-term peace. It is less about locking someone down and more about the brain recognizing that this relationship offers something difficult to replace. A woman who is emotionally independent creates a very different experience in a relationship. She is not trying to control the outcome every second. She does not shape her entire identity around being chosen, and she does not collapse emotionally every time uncertainty appears. There is a calmness in the way she moves through relationships, and that calmness has a powerful psychological effect. Instead of creating pressure, she creates emotional clarity. The strange thing is, men often become more attached when they feel emotionally free rather than emotionally trapped. When there is no constant desperation for reassurance, no emotional manipulation, and no need to constantly prove love, the relationship begins feeling safer to invest in. The mind slowly shifts from temporary attraction to long-term emotional connection because peace starts becoming more valuable than stimulation. And this is where standards become important. A woman with standards changes the emotional dynamic without needing to announce it. She naturally communicates that consistency matters, respect matters, emotional maturity matters. Not through ultimatums, but through the way she carries herself. Her energy quietly says, "You do not get permanent access to me through temporary effort." That changes people. Because when someone realizes they could genuinely lose a person who brings peace, depth, and emotional stability into their life, they begin approaching the relationship differently. Effort becomes more intentional. Communication becomes more thoughtful. The desire to protect the connection becomes stronger than the desire to keep searching for something else. Over time, attraction evolves into attachment. Not the unhealthy kind built on dependency, but the kind built on emotional meaning. The relationship stops feeling like entertainment and starts feeling like home. And psychologically, that is one of the biggest turning points in human connection. The brain no longer asks, "What else is out there?" It starts asking, "How do I keep this?" What makes this even more powerful is that women who trigger deep commitment are rarely trying to force it. They are focused on their own growth, emotional balance, purpose, and self-respect. They have a life outside the relationship, and paradoxically, that independence often makes the relationship feel more valuable. Because people are naturally drawn toward those who feel emotionally complete on their own. In the end, commitment is rarely created through pressure. It happens when someone experiences a connection that feels emotionally rare enough to protect. And when a man encounters a woman whose presence brings both peace and depth, his mindset often changes without him even noticing. The need to keep searching slowly fades, and in its place comes something much quieter, but much stronger. The desire to stay. The first signal is scarcity. A high-value woman does not give her energy away carelessly. She is still kind, warm, and emotionally open, but she is also selective. She understands that attention, emotional intimacy, and access to her life should carry meaning. Because of that, her presence feels valuable instead of overly accessible. Human beings naturally place higher value on what feels rare, and emotionally, this becomes even more powerful. When a woman is always there no matter how careless someone becomes, the relationship slowly loses emotional weight. But when her time and energy exist within clear boundaries, people naturally begin treating her more seriously, more respectfully, not because she is trying to seem hard to reach, but because she genuinely knows how to respect her own emotional space. The second signal is emotional self-control. One of the most attractive qualities in a relationship is emotional stability. A woman who can manage her emotions without constantly falling into chaos creates an incredible sense of peace for the person beside her. She does not depend entirely on male attention to feel valuable or happy, and because of that, her energy feels lighter, calmer, and emotionally safer. This changes relationship dynamics more than most people realize. Many men become so accustomed to emotionally unstable relationships that they no longer notice how emotionally exhausting they are. Then they meet a woman who feels grounded, someone who communicates calmly, handles conflict with maturity, and does not create drama just to feel loved. And suddenly, the relationship begins feeling lighter, safer, more emotionally balanced, and over time, that peace becomes addictive. The third signal is clear standards. A woman with standards knows exactly how she wants to be treated, and she does not feel guilty for expecting respect. She does not tolerate inconsistency, emotional immaturity, or disrespect simply because she fears losing someone. Instead of chasing validation, she quietly observes whether the other person's actions truly align with the kind of relationship she wants to build. And that changes male behavior, because the moment a man realizes this woman is fully capable of walking away when something no longer aligns with her standards, the relationship stops feeling casual. His actions begin carrying emotional weight. His investment becomes more intentional. His communication becomes more thoughtful, not only because of the fear of losing her, but because human beings naturally protect connections they believe are genuinely valuable. And eventually, men stop asking themselves, is there someone better out there? And start asking, how do I keep this relationship? And that is usually the moment attraction begins transforming into real commitment. The fourth signal is calmness. A high-value woman does not use drama to feel important in a relationship. She does not turn every conflict into emotional chaos, nor does she make love feel like a constant state of tension and emotional guessing. What makes her different is her ability to maintain stable energy even when things become difficult, and this is something men feel very deeply over time. After years of experiencing emotionally unstable relationships, many men begin realizing that peace is actually one of the rarest things to find. They become used to explosive arguments, silent treatment used as punishment, and endless conflicts driven by the need to prove who is right and who is wrong. Then they meet a woman who knows how to communicate with maturity, who listens instead of reacting impulsively, and who can remain soft even while feeling hurt. And suddenly, love no longer feels exhausting. A calm woman makes a man feel like he no longer has to stay emotionally guarded all the time. Around her, the nervous system begins to relax. Conversations feel lighter. Even silence no longer feels uncomfortable. And over time, that sense of safety creates very deep emotional attachment. Because in the end, people always want to return to the place where they feel the most at peace. The fifth signal is having a strong personal life. A high-value woman does not place her entire identity inside a relationship. She has work, passions, goals, and things that make her feel alive and fulfilled even when nobody is beside her. Her life does not stop simply because a relationship enters it, and that creates a very unique kind of attraction. Because there is a huge difference between a woman who is truly living her life and a woman who is waiting for someone else to become her entire world. When a woman has her own direction in life, her energy does not feel emotionally needy. She enters love from a place of choice rather than dependency. And men are often deeply attracted to that kind of energy, not because she is cold or too independent to need anyone, but because her presence feels emotionally complete. Being with her feels like an expansion of an already meaningful life, rather than a desperate attempt to fill an inner emptiness. The sixth signal is, she does not need, she chooses. This is one of the most emotionally mature forms of feminine energy. A high-value woman does not live by constantly seeking validation from men. She does not need attention in order to feel worthy, nor does she need a relationship to prove she deserves love, and this completely changes the way she loves. She does not try to keep someone by sacrificing her self-respect. She does not constantly try to become good enough to be chosen. She does not turn love into a place where she begs for emotional reassurance. Instead, she simply observes whether someone truly aligns with her life and standards. And that creates a very deep kind of attraction. Because when a woman recognizes her own value before others validate it, she begins loving from confidence instead of fear of abandonment. And men can feel that difference very clearly. The final signal is, she neither chases nor runs. Most people in love fall into one of two extremes. Either they chase emotions so intensely that they lose themselves completely, or they fear getting hurt so much that they constantly avoid real emotional intimacy. But an emotionally mature woman lives in neither extreme. She does not cling in order to keep someone, but she also does not run away when emotions become deep. She remains connected to herself within the relationship. Soft without being weak. Independent without becoming emotionally cold. Capable of loving deeply without abandoning herself in the process. And that balance creates an incredible sense of emotional safety for men. Because the healthiest relationships are not built on the fear of losing each other. They are built on two people freely choosing each other every day. When a woman does not chase love out of desperation, but also does not avoid emotional intimacy out of fear, she creates a kind of connection that is extremely rare in the modern world. The kind of connection that slowly makes a man stop searching outside of the relationship, because for the first time, he feels like he has finally found a place he truly wants to return to. Signs a man is truly serious about you. One of the biggest mistakes people make in relationships is paying attention to words more than patterns. Attraction can create beautiful promises, emotional intensity, and temporary effort. But genuine commitment reveals itself through consistency over time. When a man is truly serious about a woman, his behavior begins changing in ways that feel intentional rather than impulsive. And most of the time, these changes happen naturally because emotional attachment quietly reshapes priorities. The first sign is consistent investment. A man who is emotionally serious does not disappear whenever things become inconvenient. His effort is not based only on mood, loneliness, or temporary excitement. Instead, there is a steady rhythm to the way he shows up. He makes time. He checks in. He follows through. And over time, his presence starts feeling emotionally reliable rather than unpredictable. This does not mean perfection. Every person gets busy, overwhelmed, or emotionally distracted sometimes. But when a man genuinely values a relationship, inconsistency stops becoming his normal pattern. Even in difficult periods, there is still a clear sense that he is emotionally trying to maintain the connection rather than slowly drifting away from it. And this matters because consistency is one of the clearest forms of emotional intention. Anyone can create intensity for a short period of time. Real seriousness is revealed through repeated effort. The second sign is that he slowly reduces unnecessary connections with other women. This is not always something dramatic or announced directly. In many cases, it happens quietly. His attention becomes more focused. The need for constant validation from outside sources weakens. Conversations and interactions that once felt exciting start losing emotional importance because one relationship now carries more meaning than the others. This is a psychological shift that often happens when attraction begins turning into attachment. A man who is emotionally invested naturally becomes more protective of the connection he values most. The desire to explore endless options slowly loses its emotional appeal because deep down, he no longer wants to risk damaging something meaningful for temporary attention. And importantly, this change is usually voluntary. It does not come from pressure or control. When someone truly values a relationship, protecting it becomes instinctive. The third sign is emotional openness. Men who are only casually interested often keep conversations at the surface level. They may flirt, joke, and enjoy the connection, but they avoid exposing the deeper parts of themselves. A man who becomes emotionally serious begins sharing more of his inner world. He talks about his fears, past experiences, insecurities, family dynamics, personal dreams, and the things that shaped him emotionally. This is significant because emotional vulnerability creates psychological attachment. People rarely open themselves deeply unless they feel emotionally safe with someone. And when a man starts inviting a woman into the private parts of his mind and life, it often means he no longer sees the relationship as temporary. At some point, he stops protecting only his image and starts revealing his reality. And that changes intimacy completely. The final sign may be the most important of all. He adjusts his behavior to align with your standards. When a man truly cares about losing a woman, he begins paying attention to the emotional impact of his actions. He becomes more aware of what hurts the relationship and more intentional about creating emotional security. Not because he is pretending to become someone else, but because emotionally meaningful relationships naturally inspire growth. This is where many people misunderstand male behavior. They think love should require endless explaining, convincing, and begging for basic respect. But when a man genuinely values a woman, he often begins adapting on his own. Communication improves, effort improves, emotional maturity improves. The relationship becomes important enough for him to reflect on himself more honestly. And this is one of the clearest differences between temporary attraction and real commitment. Temporary attraction wants access. Real commitment wants alignment. A man who is serious does not only want to keep a woman in his life, he wants to become the kind of man capable of keeping the relationship healthy long term. And when that mindset appears, the relationship starts moving away from casual emotion and toward genuine partnership. Because in the end, people reveal their priorities through behavior, not promises. And when a man is truly emotionally invested, you will usually feel it not in dramatic moments, but in the quiet consistency of how he chooses the relationship again and again over time. The core message: real commitment cannot be forced. One of the deepest misunderstandings people have about love is believing they must constantly shape themselves into whatever another person wants in order to be chosen. Many women spend years trying to become more convenient, more agreeable, more emotionally available, more patient, more understanding, hoping that if they give enough of themselves, someone will finally become serious about them. But real commitment rarely grows from self-abandonment. The truth is, people do not deeply value what is endlessly available at the cost of someone's identity. And over time, constantly performing for love becomes emotionally exhausting. You begin losing touch with yourself because every decision starts revolving around keeping someone interested, keeping someone happy, or preventing someone from leaving. And that is not love. That is fear disguised as devotion. The strange thing is, the women who often inspire the deepest commitment are usually not the women trying hardest to hold everything together. They are the women who remain connected to themselves while loving someone else. Women who have emotional depth, boundaries, standards, purpose, and a life that still feels meaningful outside of relationships. Because emotionally healthy attraction works differently than most people think. The more someone feels internally fulfilled, the less desperate their energy becomes. And when desperation disappears, presence becomes more powerful. There is a quiet confidence that comes from no longer needing another person to validate your worth every moment. You stop approaching love from emotional hunger and start approaching it from emotional choice. That changes everything. A woman who respects herself naturally communicates that her time, energy, and emotional world have value. She no longer over-explains her standards. She no longer begs to be treated properly. She no longer sacrifices her peace just to avoid loneliness. And ironically, this often creates deeper attraction because people instinctively value what feels emotionally rare and difficult to replace. This is why boundaries matter so much. Boundaries are not walls meant to push love away. They are emotional standards that protect your peace, identity, and self-respect. Without boundaries, relationships slowly become built on fear, emotional imbalance, and silent resentment. But when someone knows how to protect their emotional well-being, love becomes healthier, calmer, and more intentional. And over time, emotionally mature men recognize this. They recognize the difference between a woman who is trying to be chosen by everyone and a woman who is simply choosing what aligns with her life. One energy feels emotionally dependent, the other feels grounded, secure, and deeply attractive. This is also why building your own life is essential. A meaningful life creates emotional stability. When you have passions, goals, routines, friendships, purpose, and self-respect, relationships stop becoming your only source of identity. Love becomes part of your life instead of the center of your existence. And paradoxically, this often makes people value you more. Because human beings are naturally drawn toward people who feel emotionally alive within themselves. Someone who continues growing, dreaming, creating, and evolving carries a different kind of energy. Their presence feels expansive instead of emotionally consuming. At some point, men stop seeing that woman as just another romantic experience. She begins feeling emotionally significant, rare, difficult to replace. And that is when seriousness naturally appears. Not because she demanded it, not because she manipulated him into commitment, but because the emotional cost of losing her begins feeling greater than the comfort of staying emotionally detached. In the end, the goal is not to convince someone to love you more. The goal is to become so deeply connected to your own value, peace, and purpose that love no longer requires you to betray yourself in order to keep it. Because the strongest relationships are never built on desperation. They are built when two people freely recognize the value in each other and choose, again and again, not to lose something truly meaningful. If you've stayed until this point, perhaps you're also on the journey of becoming a more peaceful and valuable version of yourself. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.